thought on day one we might have to wake you up. I didn't choose the music for that, apologies. But I did learn a lot about the food business from a guy who's on Matthew's board of directors, a guy, Paul Skinner. And he kind of helped turn around Domino's in Australia long before Don May kind of took it to where it has been globally, and taught me a lot about the things that were mentioned around consistency of supply, and more broadly this amazing kind of consumption upgrade we've seen around the whole world, whereby northwards of 1 billion people have kind of been inserted into a level of prosperity where they can afford products from this part of the world. I wanted to tell you today a little bit about what Alibaba is. I just want to take a survey of the room. How many people have been to Hangzhou? Great. How many people have been to Hema Fresh or know what Hema Fresh is? Probably the same people. Great. And then final question, how many of you export currently to China? Great. So look, this is still a wonderful runway that's ahead of you. There are a lot of, I'd say, very humbling things that happen to me every day in the food business. And I really learnt this industry in the mid-2000s from a guy that launched Tamania Angus out of New Zealand, which has a sister business in Australia, obviously, and set up the first cattle feedlot for what was McDonald's business in North China in the late 90s. And that was an absolute roller coaster ride. And if you want to talk about that over a beer later, I'd be happy to. But I think it gives you an ability to look at the market in a lot of context. And I will say that the data that's been shared with you by all the previous presenters and also the comments on market access are absolutely spot on. You have to take a long view of this market. It's not going away. And by the show of hands, there are the numbers that you're going to see on some of the material today. I think there's a wonderful future ahead, especially for Australian exporters into China. This is mirrored by some numbers that are very up to date out of our Singles Day celebration. And that video there, I just wanted to kick off with to kind of show you how Chinese consumers look at consuming everything. It's very, very different to Flybuys. It's very, very different to Harris Farms. It's very, very different to Aldi. And it's very, very different to the way most consumers here go about shopping for products, be it infant formula or Ugg boots or fresh beef. Would also like to say we do a lot of work with the MLA. I've, in my previous life, hosted some of their members at events in China, and then Maggie Jo, who's the ambassador for Australia and New Zealand, who apologises she's not here today. She was a guest attendee at a couple of Australia Day events we've done in Shanghai, and look forward to doing more and more with the MLA because you need to be telling the same story, and it's terribly important you get that brand right up to where it needs to be valued. But also just mentioned kind of as a housekeeping rule, and particularly for media who are in the room today, Alibaba is a US-listed Chinese business navigating a very complex world. So if you are going to write about today, please do get in touch with me. We would love to make sure that all your stories are in order. That being said, this business is young in Australia. We're a 19-year-old company. I was the second employee with Maggie Jo 2.5 years ago. But in that time, we built the team out to about 52 people with teams in Sydney, Melbourne, and a serviced office in Auckland, and teams across the e-commerce business, Alipay, a payments business, and the cloud business, and probably teams from all of our business units, of which there are about 40, in and out of Australia at any given time. To try to understand the breadth of the business, I really want to go back to its foundations. Jack Ma has a very warm relationship with Australia personally. It has a very intimate friendship with Newcastle, particularly Newcastle University. And I'm delighted to be up there at the end of the month celebrating the first set of Ma Morley Scholars up at that university on the 30th of the month. And that's about a class of 30 students who are funded I think for over the next decade, and a number of scholarships to strengthen Australia-China ties. Jack had a pen pal in Newcastle, and he really learned about being an international citizen through many, many trips to Australia. And so not dissimilar to my mother, who was an immigrant from Eastern Europe. He learned to go fishing here, he learned to drive a car here, he learned about why Australian beef and lamb is amongst the best in the world here, the same way that all these consumers that I'm going to talk about later in the presentation did. And also quite a large number of Australia's senior leadership also have a close relationship with Australia and New Zealand. That really helps us, together with the broader Chinese community in these markets, tell the story back to China. And I think you'll see how that shows up later on. Some very big numbers here, but as a whole, China's a big place, so the numbers are always bigger. So in that respect, it's not that daunting. I think the thing that is daunting is the pace and speed of change. And you'll see that particularly with our new supermarket businesses that have been mentioned. And I'd say as another indication of that, Alibaba managed to achieve, in terms of total revenue across the platform, or GMV, in about 19 years what it took Walmart over 54 years to achieve. And so I think that shows you the time compression in the world in which we live in is far more accelerated than previous regimes and patterns we've seen. This is the slide, if you are interested in what I'm talking about, that I ask you to really focus or clean your spectacles and take a look at. I can tell you when I joined 2.5 years ago, it was far more complicated. It looked like a kind of circuit board delivered by our Chinese engineers. And we've managed to try to simplify it, although it's obviously not quite there yet. The business keeps evolving, so therefore I'm going to use some Western analogies just to race through it and ask that you give me a bit of leeway with those, and then talk about what underpins it, the technology at the bottom. So on the top left, retail commerce. These are effectively B2B and B2C platforms in and out of China. So Alipay, Alibaba.com out of China, AliExpress, which I'm sure a lot of you and your children buy on, and then into China, Tmall. We have group buying platforms like Groupon. We've got ones that are just for food. We've got platforms where we purchase the product and resell it. The point is the platforms keep changing all the time. And so I doubt if I present this at next year's forum, if we're re-invited back here, that it'll look the same. It'll be very different. 2.5 years ago when I started, I only talked about Tmall Global, which was a bonded warehouse platform where people like Swiss and Blackmores and Bellamy's trade, because it allows you to export and then leave all the details to our teams in China to look after. We've now since developed 2 other platforms that most of the major brands also trade on, and they see it as a kind of rising tide and a bigger pie. So just think of the platforms evolving. Now, if you think of Gumtree here or Trade Me in New Zealand or eBay, when you log on to those sites, they're still effectively the same. A buyer and a seller connecting. The whole window into the platform looks the same. So in China, we're seeing just reinventions of these platforms all the time, and a lot of fast competitors nipping at our heels as well. The consumer services are effectively like a TripAdvisor for everything. Buying movie tickets, going to football matches, going to restaurants. Everything is reviewed very, very strongly by both the people who are writing the reviews. They're incentivized by the brands and by their friends to write reviews, and other way around by the readers. Now, if I was to ask people here, how many people read TripAdvisor? Be honest. Who write on TripAdvisor? A few people, and they're obviously passionate about the places they visit and their interests. The reality in China is that there have to be thousands and thousands of reviews on both sides for a product to even get airtime amongst consumers. We also have the digital media world, which is like Weibo, YouTube, Instagram, WeChat, Facebook, all in one ecosystem. So effectively, there's a kind of virtuous cycle of storytelling, and then we're developing new technologies as well. If you would try to connect your beef farm or your lamb business Facebook page with your e-commerce page, with your daughter's Instagram page about sustainable beef, and then onto the MLA page, and then connect it to a payment platform with, let's say, Qantas Platinum Miles or whatever your payment was of choice, that'd take a lot of work to connect, right? You have to pay a consultant. It might not even be possible. Whereas in this ecosystem, it's one big kind of momentum being built within the ecosystem. And so that's about just over 600 million users in that world as we follow them around with their Alipay kind of user ID, right? And that's the world that Michael and others are living in, and that I was living in for a long time. Beneath it, we have the delivery, the payment, the marketing, and the cloud all underneath that. And we felt we had to control it ourselves because the business is getting so large, and we have to make sure we can process transactions and deliver parcels in really high volume. So what is new retail? A lot of people talk about this online to offline thing. It's not about us going out and buying up Westfield or buying shopping centres or getting more bricks and mortar. It's about having more places for people to shop in and try things and get benefits from the brands and their friends and promote loyalty and experience. Maybe you don't like a product, you want to return it somewhere else. Maybe you want to try something out of a duty-free store in a place that you may be visiting or you may want to visit. There are all sorts of innovations happening there, and we've worked on investments with In Time, which is equivalent to Westfield, one of the best department store brands where all the great luxury brands are. Suning, which is like JB Hi-Fi, Easy Home is like Bunnings, and then a whole range of supermarkets from the top end right down to kind of mass market, mass market supermarkets. So we really want to have places where all the brands on the platform can play in the offline world as well. Because remember, online's only 18% of the market in China, which is very high even compared to other markets. But there's a whole offline world, and there's a blurring between the two, which is probably similar patterns are developing here with a younger generation of consumer who don't really necessarily care where they're shopping, when they're shopping, how they're shopping, as long as they're getting that great brand story of the brand they're interested in. We have 5 big goals as a business and buckets of business: buying to export product out of China, selling product into China from really 4 places. Where's all the good stuff in the world? Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, North America, and Europe, right? So what we're sending out of China goes to all over the world. What we're bringing into China really comes from where that good stuff is. We need them to be able to pay for it. We have a travel business whereby we want consumers to be able to live through that journey and travel to a wine cellar door or visit a beef farm or do bridge climb. We need some of them where they can somehow for them to kind of activate how can they learn about the brand. And so I'll talk more and more about that, and I think that's a huge opportunity for businesses here. And then we want to deliver packages back for them so that it's not just everything they can jam in their suitcases, but there's a much more efficient way for them to be collecting product when they're back in China. And that includes beef and lamb, absolutely. We're in a great position here being in the top categories. So this is cross-border e-commerce categories that we're strong in. And this is ANZ product is kind of the envy of all of our peers and my colleagues in Europe and North America. And we have this 1.5 million Chinese people that as a proportion of a population in New Zealand, Australia of about 30 million is really telling the story for us. I talked a bit about Jack and our Australian footprint. Those are some of the brands on Tmall with a flagship. There's about 120 of these businesses that have a flagship store. The balance of the brands are either inside a multi-brand retailer or somewhere on some of our smaller C2C platforms. Again, we've kind of moved from a commodity journey to a lifestyle journey. And so all the talk today about where you should be selling your product to, it's absolutely resonated online with the prices that we're seeing and that we can charge for a product, particularly in the fresh category, and that's across horticulture, aquaculture, and protein. So there are really 3 or 4 ways into our business for a non-fresh brand. Fresh is a very big growth category for us, but has not been served well online historically. We've made a number of investments in recent years about that. I'm sure some of you heard about the Windchain deal with JBS. I don't think that really impacts the Australian market because I see the product from Australia and New Zealand having a very different brand story to product from South America. So I talked about just having Tmall Global 2.5 years ago. Now we have 3 or 4 platforms, and brands can sell across all of them. That's quite an interesting conversation to have with CEOs and export teams when they've just spent all that time setting up on one platform, and then you tell them, hey, you need to be on these other 3 platforms. But that's the reality of the market. We've had to develop these platforms to compete with small, nimble competitors in our business. Just on Singles Day and Double 11 last week, very big numbers. The highlight for me is the fact that there's even an ANZ brand in the top 5. And remember, think where all the world's luxury brands and multinational brands are. Double 11, obviously, Miranda Kerr has just signed a deal with Swiss in the last 24 hours to be their brand ambassador. This is wonderful for brand Australia, and particularly for the beauty category. She has her Core Organics brand, which is on Tmall. And we can talk more about, please do approach me if you want to learn more about this whole space. These are the top 10 brands out of Australia by Chinese buyers this year for Singles Day, and it's kind of a good measurement of the health of the whole industry, because people are delivering anywhere between 35 and 45% of annual sales on a single day. It is a big discounting day, as is Black Friday or any other major event in the retail calendar, but it's an amazing chance for you to work out what consumers want, what are they liking, what are they not liking. And there are some products in there, particularly in NPD, new product development in beauty and organics that are really surprising and very exciting. I would say food as a broader category. These are the global numbers for some of the biggest categories, and I've highlighted what are either Aussie or Kiwi brands, or what I would attribute to Australia and New Zealand. And so you think about your budgets in Australia, even for some of the big brands, vis-a-vis Nestle, Palmolive, Unilever, GNC, we're batting well above our weight. So, I think we need to just kind of stop and say, congratulations. We're right in the crosshairs of this consumer. I put Aldi in there because most of the product for their first year of operation came out of their Australian business, because Chinese demand and interest in Aldi Australia. Aptamil I put in there from Danone, because that product's only out of Australia and New Zealand in the mother and baby category. But there are similar stories in the fresh category as well. If we look at our wind chain business, we have a big sourcing business that's just been set up to look after our online food platforms and also our offline food platforms. And our first year ambition is to look at a ballpark figure of products we can source globally for all of our businesses. And that gives us a lot better ability to send out global buying teams and really look at long-term contracts that are better for people who are supplying as well. We have invested in Igor and Xfresh, who would have probably the second largest cold chain in business in China. Remember, most of the big cold chain businesses are owned and operated in a proprietary manner by the big QSR fast food firms like McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, etc. But I've personally gone out and kicked the tires on the Xfresh cold chain. I'm pretty happy with it, and that's going to look after a lot of our businesses, including Hema Fresh or Hippo Fresh. I wanted to highlight here some of the early work we've done in fresh and frozen with Rangers, Valley, O'Connor, Mayura. And this project started less than 10 months ago. So we had buying teams come out there, we chaperoned them, we handheld them, we visited all these properties. We worked out exactly all the stuff that Matthew was talking about very, very quickly. Cuts, portioning, packaging, what should be done in China, what should be done in Australia, and obviously had to go through all the market access challenges as well. But this has grown into a multi-million-dollar business in a very short space of time, mainly for this 80 store plus offline business that we've developed. And again, all the provenance is hugely important. We probably spent more time videoing and talking to people on farms in that week that we were down here pushing this project through than I had with any other category buyers who come from market. We brought down our own drones. We were going to every restaurant we could possibly find with this product in it here locally. Everything that has been talked about today, there are going to be things that you can leverage from the experience in Japan and Korea. It's just going to all happen in China in a shorter space of time. And again, these people want to know exactly where this product comes from, And if they can visit that place or a friend can visit it on a visit to Australia, even better. We've been lucky to have a big expo in Australia every year. That's now running annually, about 180 merchants. It brings a whole ecosystem to life. And I think we're at the point now where we've kind of burnt the boats. We're here to stay. We have a very strong team, a lot of local Aussies and Kiwis in that team. And it's really important for our teams in Hangzhou when they come down here that they've got the right advice. There have been a lot of Chinese groups obviously visiting Australia in recent years, and it's really important as the largest e-commerce platform globally that we're sending the right message to Australia and New Zealand as well. So a big thank you to the organisers. As a Kiwi, I've tried to visit somewhere kind of relevant every year, whether it's Tumut or North Kimberley or getting out to Warren and trying to meet as many of you as possible. We've got a wonderful team, but we realise we're a young company talking to many brands that are northwards of 150 years old. So we're at the beginning of this journey. I hope today wasn't too much of a waterfall of information. Please do get in touch with the organisers if there's anything further you'd like to learn about Alibaba. Thank you.